Hi, my name is Chris. In this video, I'm going to show you our family trip to Denver, the Rocky Mountain National Park, and a very quick side trip to Colorado Springs to visit the Garden of the Gods. Plus, if you stick around to the end of the video, I'll show you how I was also able to get round-trip tickets from Cincinnati to Denver for $65 each. And I'll also show you some really good planning information for visiting the national parks. We are actually a family of 5, but our 2 daughters are in college. So on this trip, it was just myself, my wife Jen, and our 15-year-old son Ethan.
When we wake, hear the birds and see the sun. Side by side our fears are done. Oh, the good times just begun. Oh, we know what we have, let's hold on tight. Found what we're looking for in life. Call us crazy, but things are finally right. With you and I, the future is bright.
In this video, I'll give a brief rundown of how each day of our trip broke down, and then I'll follow that up with a video of where we went and what we saw. With that said, let's get started. While we were planning our trip, we watched several videos about Denver on YouTube. One of those was on one of our favorite channels, The Adventures of A+K. So while we were in Denver, we decided to try to visit several of the places that they mentioned on their Denver trip. Plus, we also went to several that we found ourselves. I'll make sure to link to their video, plus any of the other sites I mentioned throughout the video in the description below. Denver has a ton of great local coffee shops, so of course we started the day out right by visiting one of them. After coffee, we decided to go for breakfast at the Denver Biscuit Company. I would highly recommend you make it a priority to stop there on your trip to Denver. After breakfast, we decided to do some walking around the city and take in a lot of the great murals that are around the city. While we were out walking, we came across one of the best donut shops we've ever been at, Voodoo Donuts. Then we went to Laramie Square and decided to pick up some last-minute supplies at one of the biggest REIs I've ever been to. Later that evening, we tried an A+K recommendation and decided to visit the Denver Central Market. This is a renovated warehouse with multiple different vendors that sell all different kinds of stuff. Things like French chocolates, wood-fired pizza, sushi. There's even a butcher shop and some of the best ice cream you'll ever try. The next day we got up and started the day with some coffee and some breakfast at a local bagel breakfast sandwich place. After breakfast, Ethan and I decided to rent some scooters and ride around downtown taking in the sights. Then it was time to head to the airport to pick up our rental car. Here's something to keep in mind if you're planning a trip to Denver. The Denver airport actually sits about 30 to 40 minutes away from downtown Denver. It's on the north side, and an Uber or Lyft ride is a little expensive to get downtown. We weren't expecting that, so keep that in mind. Once we got close to Estes Park, we started getting our first look at the Rockies. On the drive to Estes Park, you wind through the mountains and the views are just gorgeous. We checked into our hotel, the Ridgeline Hotel at Estes Park, and headed out to dinner at Smokin' Dave's Barbecue in Estes Park, which I also highly recommend. The food is delicious. While we were waiting to be seated, we decided to go for a walk around the building. And as we headed around the building, we walked around the back, and there, munching on some grass, was our first elk sighting. After dinner, we decided to drive on into Rocky Mountain National Park and take a quick look around. We were treated to a beautiful drive where we actually saw a lot more elk, and they were chasing each other around and bugling since it was their rutting season. Third day was actually our official start of our time in Rocky Mountain National Park, and we actually had quite a bit of hiking planned for the day. We started at around 7 a.m. at the Bear Lake Trailhead for our first hike of the day, the Emerald Lake hike. This is a 4-mile hike that goes past 2 other lakes, Nymph Lake and Dream Lake, on its way up to Emerald Lake. What an introduction to Rocky Mountain National Park. The hike is actually very serene if you get started early and avoid the crowds. And the views are just amazing. Once we came back down from Emerald Lake, we started on our next hike for the day, the hike to Alberta Falls, which ended up being about a 2-mile hike. For our last hike of the day, we hiked from Bear Lake to Bierstadt Lake, and then from the lake down to the Bierstadt Lake trailhead where we caught the shuttle back to Bear Lake. The wind was actually blowing pretty hard at the lake, so we weren't able to stay there for too long, but when we broke out of the forest and to the switchback that goes down to the Bierstadt Lake trailhead, the views were just magnificent. The trail goes back and forth, switching back all the way down the mountain, about a mile I think. This hike was a total of about 4 miles. The next morning we got up pretty early in order to see the sunrise. We got to our spot about 5:45 in the morning and hiked in the short walk to Sprauge Lake. The views here were gorgeous. What a beautiful sunrise. It was quiet, peaceful. There were actually quite a few people around the lake, but it was dark and everybody was in their own little spot, so you really didn't see anybody else. After the sunrise and a hike around the lake, we decided to head back into town to get some breakfast. We went back into the park and hiked the alluvial fan, which is actually a set of rocks and a waterfall and a streaming river that comes down the hill. And it has beautiful aspens all around it. And this time of year they were all gold and orange. So it was a gorgeous spot. After that, we decided to drive up the famous Trail Ridge Road. And on the way, we stopped at the Mini Parks Curve Overlook, as well as the Rainbow Curve Overlook. Now, before we headed up Trail Ridge Road, we'd actually seen a sign that said that the wind was high today, with wind gusts up to 65 miles per hour. And they weren't lying. We had planned a 4-mile hike in and out above the tree line on the tundra. It's a trail called Ute Trail to Timberline Pass. And when we got there, we could barely stand up. The wind was so strong on that part of the trail. Jen actually got knocked down by the wind once, and Ethan and I both almost fell multiple times just being blown around by the wind. But we made it through it and had a wonderful hike. The scenery was beautiful. The 360-degree views of the mountains were gorgeous. And after we got back from the Ute Trail, we decided to drive back down Trail Ridge into the park, and we stopped at the Horseshoe Park area and were treated to a wonderful sunset. So our hope this morning was to drive back up Trail Ridge and go across to the other side of the park to the Grand Lake side and do some hikes over there. But as we headed into the park, we saw a sign saying that the wind was even worse today than it was the day before. There were gusts up to 85 miles per hour today. We decided to chance it, but Jen was not happy. She didn't like Trail Ridge Road as it was. The drop-offs are incredibly steep. There's places with no guardrails and a white line and 3 inches of pavement on the other side and a straight drop. So with the wind blowing that hard, it made it especially scary. As we were driving up the road, there were some small trees down, but I wasn't too worried. Jen was pretty scared. But once we got past the tree line and into the open up above the tree line, the wind was blowing so hard the entire SUV was shaking and rocking. And the wind was blowing a lot harder than it was the day before, and I started to get scared. So we decided to head back down into the park. It just wasn't worth it. The road was too dangerous with the wind going like that. As we came down the trail, we saw a big tree down over the road on the section where we had just driven through a few minutes before. When we got back down into the valley, we figured we could just spend the day in the valley taking a look around. But when we got out of the car, the wind was just too strong even there. You couldn't barely stand up in it. Jen said, I wish we could go someplace else, and I said, why don't we? So we decided to make a mad dash back to our hotel. It was still early in the morning. We checked out of the hotel and headed for Colorado Springs and the Garden of the Gods. It was about a 2-hour drive from Estes Park to the Garden of the Gods. On the way, I booked a hotel in Colorado Springs. When we got to Colorado Springs, we checked in real quickly and changed into our summer clothes because we had gone from 30 degrees to 85 degrees in that 2-hour drive. And the wind had died down considerably from where we were. Then we were off to hike the Garden of the Gods. The next morning we got up and had breakfast and headed to the Denver airport to catch our flight home. This was definitely a great trip, and we made some memories for a lifetime. We loved Rocky Mountain National Park. We can't wait to go back. I would highly recommend it. Now for the ticket and planning information I promised you. How did I get round-trip tickets from Cincinnati to Denver for $65? First, let me say this video is not sponsored in any way. I'm just sharing the information on how I was able to get those tickets. I have a couple of different memberships to cheap flight websites. The first one I ever joined was Scott's Cheap Flights, but it's mostly international. And recently they've started adding some domestic, which has been very nice. But for this particular ticket, I used another site called Matt's Flights. And Matt's Flights website deals primarily with domestic flights. You can enter in your home airport or the airports in your area, and it will track any flights that come in that meet the criteria of a cheap flight, and it'll send you that information as an alert. I know that Scott's Cheap Flights offers a free version and a paid version. Matt's Flights may only offer the paid version, I'm not 100% sure, but they're well worth it. It's something between $30 and $60. If you book one flight, you've more than made up for that. And as I said before, I'll link to these below. Now for the national park planning, I actually found a website run by a former park ranger named Ash, and her website is called Dirt in My Shoes. She provides itineraries for planning and visiting the national parks, different national parks. and she offers a 1-day, a 2-day, and a 3-day option. I think the 3-day option that we purchased for Rocky Mountain National Park cost $29. It was very much worth it. It gave you a complete itinerary for the 3 days, including tips on the best places to see, a timeline on when to go and where to go at certain times throughout the day to avoid crowds, and even things like where to stay in the area, lodging, food, those kind of tips. So it's very much worth it, I think, to have a plan like that when you go someplace like Rocky Mountain National Park, so that you don't find yourself just standing looking around wondering, what do I do next? I've actually talked to a lot of people who show up at a place and just wing it, and when they get there they see 1 or 2 main things, and then they're like, what do I do next? And they spend more time trying to figure out where to go or what to do and standing in line than they do actually seeing the sights. So I think the plan is very much worth it. If you like this video, click the like button below. I'm planning to do a couple more of these videos in the future as time permits.